Ironside will not be seen tonight, so we may bring you the following special program.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
I remember when The Dark Knight Returns came out. I remember when Watchmen came out. So, of course, I remember when Kingdom Come came out.
Kingdom Come is 4 separate issues, 48 pages apiece. It was an all-immersive kind of lifestyle for me.
It blew people away. I mean, this was the most sought-after book there was.
This was something very new, very different.
No one had seen anything like that at that scale before.
It was amazing.
I never thought from anything that people would still be talking about this book 25 years later.
Welcome back, everybody. It's time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Happy to welcome back the recently married David Pepose to Word Balloon. I think it's the first time we talked since the vows. Am I right?
Yes. Thank you so much for the kind words. It's been great. My wife and I just got back from our honeymoon, and yes, I'm officially off the market, comics fans. But I'm still excited to be telling all sorts of cool stories for you guys, including what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Yeah, it'll be good, man. You were kind enough to send me, the first six issues of Space Ghost for Dynamite, and happy to talk about that. I'm slowly bringing up a cover to show. God, you and Jonathan Lau, man, really killing it on this book.
Thank you.
And I really enjoyed the first 5 issues. So, I mean, great to see Zorak back. And then here in issue 6, oh my God, it's Moltar, everybody. And that's fantastic.
Thank you. Jonathan and I have been just having such a blast on this book. For those who haven't been reading my new series, Space Ghost, the easy elevator pitch is Batman: The Long Halloween meets The Mandalorian. It's the story of twin orphans, Jan and Jace, who, when their colony is attacked by interstellar pirates, they find themselves rescued by the mysterious vigilante known as Space Ghost. And this becomes kind of their origin story of how they go from being these orphaned rescues to becoming Space Ghosts, partners in crime fighting, and then becoming this sort of surrogate found family unit in their own right. It's been super fun getting to kind of bring Alex Toth's classic sci-fi superhero back to his roots, and seeing the response to this book and seeing all these people who either weren't familiar with Space Ghost or only knew him as a 60s cartoon or only knew him as a talk show host from Space Ghost Coast to Coast, getting to discover this character and see him for all of his potential. It's been a really wonderful experience, and we're having just such a blast working on this book.
Well, and Jonathan's killing it on the interiors, but also you've gotten so many great people to do variant covers as well. And I don't know if this is Jonathan on issue 6.
Jay Lee did that.
That's Jay Lee. Fantastic. Yeah. Very good. That doesn't suck.
Fantastic. Yeah, we've had cover artists like Bjorn Behrens and Jay Lee and Michael Cho and Anthony Marquez joining us on the book. And it's just been really amazing to see just these top flight artists involved in the book. And I think it also speaks to Alex Toth's incredible design skills. He was just so ahead of his time. And I was thinking about this earlier today, that it speaks to how immediately timeless and classic that Space Ghost design is, that not only is it still eye-catching, almost 60 years after its debut, but also the fact that it's able to translate into so many different artistic styles and still look great. I've been feeling really fortunate. I feel like this book, in a lot of ways, the reason I took on writing Space Ghost was I saw there was so much untapped potential of the character. The original show was only in 5-minute increments, so there was really no backstory, very little in the way of continuity besides Space Ghost's villains coming together in the Council of Doom. And so I figured this felt like a character with all the ingredients to be an A-lister, and yet there's never really been the runway to explore it. And so I feel in really rarefied air. I feel like there's only a handful of Space Ghost comics that have ever come out. Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti, of course, and
yes,
and Jeff Parker on Future Quest.
That's right.
But we're going for kind of a long haul approach with this, a lot of done in one and done in two adventures. So we're really able to explore every corner of Space Ghost's universe. And we're getting to see that through the eyes of his sidekicks, but also seeing the way that he goes head to head with so many of these iconic villains that a lot of newcomers don't know. And so we're slowly introducing all the various members of the Council of Doom. And I don't think it's spoiling too much to say that if Space Ghost has his hands full one-on-one, things are going to be really dire for him when the Council of Doom finally assembles.
He cops a Batman attitude, a modern Batman attitude, much as back in the 60s, it was a 60s Batman attitude.
Yeah.
And a much more friendlier Space Ghost. But no, he is, he kind of, through circumstance of the first couple issues, had Jan and Jace kind of, rescued them, and then, now has this kind of forced to be this father figure to them.
Yeah. Well, the thing that really stood out to me about Space Ghost as a character, because you hit the nail right on the head, that when he debuted in the 60s, it was in response to Adam West's Batman. That Batman show was such a seismic success that everybody was trying to kind of ride that wave. And either they would license other superhero characters or they would create their own whole cloth. And so
sure.
I feel like in a lot of ways, Space Ghost kind of enhanced that Batman formula. I mean, there's something, of course, classic and timeless and iconic about a masked crusader who, solves injustice by himself. But by injecting that kind of Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon sci-fi to the mix, that means that Space Ghost stories, they can stretch a wide variety of different types of stories, and it all still feels organic to the core concept. I think the other thing that Space Ghost did, the little twist that they brought to the mix that I think makes that character so special to me, is Batman. There are stories where Batman is without Robin, and those stories still feel organic. I would say that Space Ghost is the opposite, that from the very first appearance, his sidekicks, Jan and Jason Blip, are core parts of the mythology. And so an opinion that I quickly came across when I was working on developing Space Ghost was, I don't think you can tell a true Space Ghost story without Jan and Jace. It's like trying to make a banana split without the banana. This is very much an ensemble book. And I think Hanna-Barbera and Alex Toth were really ahead of their time when they introduced Jan and Jace, that it'd be so easy to say, okay, here's a surrogate figure for young male boy viewers to latch onto. By having Jan in the mix, they're like, oh, girls can watch this show too, and they can feel like they're a part of the action. And I maintain that Blip, back in the Silver Age, you add a monkey to a comic, the sales go up. So adding a monkey, like it's hedging your bets. And I think that has been what's so interesting to me is, of course, Alex Toth gave us so many amazing villains that really kind of exist based solely on designs and vibes in the original cartoon.
Yeah.
Having those sidekicks as the point of view characters, and the way that Kitty Pryde or Jubilee were the point of view characters in their X-Men days,
sure.
That gives us a human story underneath all the sci-fi action and spectacle. And I think that's what I hope keeps readers invested, is not only do they get to see, oh, what's the big bad that Space Ghost is going to fight this month, but seeing that relationship evolve and change. And sometimes they have two steps forward, one step back, as we see in this week's issue of Space Ghost, issue 6. I think there's something a little autobiographical to it for me. My younger siblings are triplets. And
crazy.
Yeah. They were born a week and a half shy of my 9th birthday. And I always say I felt like the dinosaur right when the meteor hit. My whole way of life just completely upended itself. And
sure.
I think Space Ghost is a little like that, where, he's been this lone vigilante for so long. He's been grappling with tragedies of his own. And this is the way that he's sort of coped with that, is by pushing that humanity down and adopting this masked identity of Space Ghost. And then suddenly you add 2 kids and a monkey to the mix, and your routines are no longer your routines. Everything changes. These kids need you. And on top of that, their sheer presence changes you, and the way that you react to things, the way that you look at yourself. And that, I think, has been such a fun thing to explore in this book. It really is. It's a story of fatherhood, just as much as it is saving the galaxy. So it's been really nice to see readers respond to that and get as invested in these characters as I am.
And Jan and Jace too. First of all, Jan has much more agency than she did back in the day. She is the warrior of the two. And if anything, it is Jace that is having a bit of a crisis of conscience as far as the new life that they're leading. And if is there a trade out yet for the first couple, or not yet?
So actually, you can still order the first volume trade of Space Ghost. Call your local comic shop. They'll be able to get it in for you. Space Ghost Volume 1 with only ghosts to comfort us. That'll collect our first 6 issues. It'll come out in November, the same day as issue 7. So it's coming out very, very soon. But yeah, we have hardcover and softcover varieties of that book. We've got covers by Francisco Mattina and Michael Cho.
Nice.
So yeah, call your comic shop, ask them to get you Space Ghost if you haven't read the book already. Because we're trying to make every issue a jumping on point. But I'm very excited for fans to get to read the thing as one cohesive storyline from beginning to end. I feel like the done in one approach really it's a neat little trick that I learned reading Batman the Long Halloween from Jeff Loeb and Tim Sal, that every issue, every time you finish an adventure with these characters, you feel that much more invested. And so the number of adventures that are completed in a particular storyline, it's the fastest way to get readers invested in a particular character, especially if they don't know them so well. And I think that's a little bit of a pendulum swing from the way that a lot of superhero stories have been told over the last 20 years. I think a lot of stories, it's a 5-part, or 6-part or a 4-part thing for a trade paperback. And so I think, you see Ryan North on Fantastic Four, you see Jed MacKay on Moon Knight, Steve Orlando on Scarlet Witch. They've really pioneered that sort of done in one approach. And that's something that we really look to for inspiration for structuring Space Ghost. So I'm very excited for readers not only to pick this thing up in singles, but to get to experience this epic storyline in a trade.
You'll forgive me as an older reader. Pioneered. The publishers rediscovered done in ones.
Yes.
I believe. That's okay. I mean, listen, taking nothing away from what the current crop are doing, including yourself. No, that's great, man, and I think we do need that as a jumping on point. And no, I'd be curious. I mean, again, this character, I remember watching him Saturday mornings when that was the ritual. I was part of that first generation of Saturday morning viewers. And I wonder if, without spoiling, and you don't have to get into specifics, but the Hanna-Barbera adventure characters, Birdman, Galaxy Trio, Herculoids, all that stuff, is that stuff available to you, or is this really just Space Ghost, Jan, Jace, and Blip?
Yeah. Well, at least for now, where we are exclusive with Space Ghost. I know, like, for example, Dynamite has a Herculoid series planned.
Great.
So we definitely, our goal is not to step on any other creator's toes.
Sure.
Although, I mean, if I have a wish list, I of course, I would love to have Space Ghost team up with the Herculoids. I feel like I have a story idea kind of in the back pocket just in case the opportunity ever avails itself. And from what I understand of Dynamite's plans, and if Nick Barucci, if you're listening, you can always correct me if I have anything wrong or I'm speaking out of school. But I think the plan is to really start each of these properties off as their own thing. Just to make sure that they have their legs to them and that they build their own fan bases. But if Dynamite ever is interested in having these characters cross paths, I certainly would be excited to get to play with some of those toys. But I've been so lucky. Space Ghost really, he's a character that there's really not like a dud in his rogues gallery. I really do think he's got a rogues gallery that's every bit as iconic as Batman or Spider-Man or the Flash. And you see it with the Council of Doom. They're sort of, I've described them as a reverse Justice League, where you had 5 villains that were like, really had strong personalities and strong concepts. And then Moltar was kind of the Aquaman of the group. And you have them all together and they immediately, they are more than the sum of their parts. Like it really like elevates all of those villains into iconic status.
Sure.
But that's been what's so fun about this series to me is that all these villains have like a unique twist. Lokar was one that I had a lot of fun with. Minor spoilers if you haven't read Space Ghost 4 and 5, our Zorak two-parter. But Lokar in the original cartoons was known as King of the Space Locusts. And in Space Ghost Coast to Coast, he often fights with Zorak over the title of being the lone locust of the apocalypse, which always makes me laugh because Zorak is a mantis and not a locust. And so in the original cartoon, Lokar doesn't have like as strong of a personality as somebody like, say, Zorak or Brak. But we were able to kind of twist that as, instead of him being the king of the locusts, he's sort of we recast him as this eldritch Lovecraftian insect god, sort of an annihilus kind of figure, where Zorak is the leader of a space cult that worships Lokar. And that was one of my favorite parts of that two-parter was Space Ghost trying to stop Zorak from, killing people to bring this god to life. And he keeps saying, Lokar isn't real. You're crazy. And it's that Hitchcock thing, of having like two people are eating dinner at a table and we know there's a ticking time bomb under the table and they don't. The fact that Space Ghost doesn't know, but we do, that Lokar is real. And then we get to see kind of all that bubble over and unfold. We're able to do that with all these characters. Brak and his brother Sisto we reintroduced as corrupt cops, and speaking to kind of that opportunistic streak. We introduced the Widow as kind of a crime boss, who, she kind of, information is her web. And so she's making all these different alliances between Space Ghost and RoboCorps and then double crossing them both. I'm very excited for Moltar, who, I likened him as a cross between Mr. Freeze, Frankenstein, and Firefly from Batman, where this is a scientist who, minor spoilers, but the preview pages are up, so you can check that out on my Twitter. He was a scientist who was obsessed with discovering the art of living flame. And he was fired. He brought his experiments home, and unfortunately his family died in the blaze. And now this obsession with living flame and his molten men are all he has left. And so it's been really cool to be able to find these little twists on these characters to take what feels like these very elemental archetypes from the original Space Ghost series and just finding a way to make them as relevant as ever in the year 2024. And I give Jonathan Lau all the credit in the world that he has really been able to lean into his own vision of these characters and make them look so exciting and fresh and new while still paying homage to the timeless designs that Alex Toth created.
I completely agree. No, Lau's killing it, and while still being respectful of the original Toth designs. And really, man, these are really, they were in those 5-minute cartoons, one-dimensional characters. So there is a lot of room to build on their backstory and give us more of a meal with these stories. Dex Baker says, I'm super late, but I love the series. It's made me hunt down classic Space Ghost. That's interesting, Dex. I wonder if that means cartoons or like we were talking about earlier, things like Future Quest and the other miniseries that have kind of popped up over the years.
Well, thank you so much for reading, Dex. I appreciate it.
Very cool. No, absolutely, man. And again, this is gonna be fun to pay attention to. And like I said, you got a classic Space Ghost fan in me, man. There you go. Here, Patrick also chiming in and says 60s Space Ghost, 90s DC Comics. Absolutely. Yeah. Very true. They're great. Even the 70s ones that came out, I want to say late 70s and stuff. Yeah, it was great. Those Hanna-Barbera adventure cartoons, they really, Johnny Quest is the king as far as the attention to detail, really trying to make it look like Toth illustrations and stuff.
Yeah.
But Birdman and Space Ghost, they always held my attention, and that goes with the Herculoids and the Galaxy Trio, that for that matter as well. And even I forget the name of not Jeannie the girl, but there was also a Shazam with an N, not an M, was another Hanna-Barbera. Yeah, well, again, man, deep cuts, but this is there's a couple people that have put up like super cuts of a bunch of Saturday morning cartoons, and you get like a 3 or 4 hour block of this is what was on in like 1972.
Oh, that's
and
funny.
it's great, man. So yeah, I no, it's these bring back great memories, and again, you're really making them fresh for the current audience, and I hope it is attracting a younger audience as well as the old farts like myself.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's one of those things. I feel like it really is a perfect storm, and I feel like we came into this at really the perfect time. In that, first off, I think Space Ghost in particular, superheroes as a genre, I think people are looking for new stuff, and I think that's what speaks to the excitement behind stuff like Absolute Batman or Absolute Wonder Woman or Superman or the Ultimates line. Is that people are like, oh, I want to see these kind of familiar archetypes. We want to shake them up. And I think Space Ghost kind of immediately fits in that vein because a lot of people know Space Ghost in a broad conceptual level,
Sure.
especially for my generation. They know Coast to Coast. They know him as
The '90s show. Very funny.
Yeah. But, I think having a superhero universe unfold that people aren't familiar with, that's, I think, really exciting to a lot of people. It's sort of, you're able to kind of take that superhero adventure, that genre that's so familiar to people, but we're able to take it in interesting, unpredictable ways because you can't anticipate where the story's headed. I think also the fact that we came out, really on the heels of what Skybound has been doing with their Energon line, which I think really set the tone for so many classic animation revivals. You see it, with Transformers, Daniel Warren Johnson, and what Josh Williamson is doing over on G.I. Joe. Those are really excellent books. And so the fact that we're able to ride that wave over at Dynamite with things like Space Ghost and Johnny Quest and Thundercats and Powerpuff Girls, and the fact that readers are like, yeah, we're really excited. Like we're able to take those kind of sci-fi superhero action adventure kind of stories, but bring that sophistication to properties from our childhood that may have not had that sophistication when we were growing up.
Absolutely.
And I think Space Ghost in particular is so interesting because he's a character that really is a product of his time whenever he comes back. And he's really is a generational figure. He appears in the 60s on the heels of Adam West Batman. And so he has that Silver Age camp energy.
Absolutely.
The 80s, he has his revival, and that's coming out right on the heels of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
True.
And sort of the toy generation. And then he comes back in Coast to Coast. It's the MTV era of irony. And even the Joe Kelly run. It came out a little bit before Batman Begins, but if you had read that book, you wouldn't have known it. It's writing that same zeitgeist of the dark, gritty, standalone superhero origin. And that was something that we really wanted to approach for this book is if you're introducing Space Ghost in the year 2024, what does that look like? For me, like a big guiding light, I love the first J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie because that was I grew up as a Next Generation fan. I wasn't as familiar. I kind of only knew about Spock through, cultural osmosis.
Certainly.
That first movie that I was like, oh, I get it. I get why people like Kirk. And I think that's sort of my biggest, loftiest aspirations for Space Ghost is I want people who maybe broadly aware of Space Ghost as a concept to figure out what it is about him that has made him such an enduring figure for generations. And seeing the response to that book, it makes me feel like we're on the right track.
Remind everyone of his power structure. He can fly on his own despite having the spaceship, but you go from there. What else can he do?
So Space Ghost is interesting because he's got the iconography of Batman, but he has a lot of powers that feel like they're in common with Superman, maybe even a little bit of Iron Man in there. He's got his power bands, which give him elemental force beams, so fire, ice, hard lasers. They also give him the ability to create force fields, whether those are force fields around himself or if they're force fields catching something. He's also got what's called his Invisobelt, which allows him to turn invisible like a ghost. And the way we kind of framed it in the book is Space Ghost himself is a normal human being, but by virtue of these power bands that sort of allow him to manipulate temperature and pressure, he's able to approximate all these elemental powers. His Invisobelt we call a radiograv harness. And so he's able to not only turn invisible, but he's able to manipulate gravity. And that allows him to fly and have a degree of super strength. And I think that's so interesting because you're really able to have your cake and eat it too, and that Space Ghost can go toe to toe with these big primal elemental forces, whether it's a space criminal or an alien beast or a meteor flying out of nowhere. But at the same time, he can be brought down to our level. You take the power bands away, and suddenly he's lost his main weapon, and that's something that we are really going to dig into in this series. We talked about it a little bit in our two-parter with Zorak. Is that if you apply the right amount of pressure on Space Ghost in the right way, suddenly those power bands become a liability and not a strength. And we will be seeing a little bit more in issue 7. There are ways to make Space Ghost vulnerable, but his number one weakness is his sidekicks, Jan and Jace and Blip, because Space Ghost may be a superhero for the galaxy, but ultimately he will do whatever it takes to keep those kids safe.
There you go. Honestly, I think, and every time I see Jonathan's art with the wristbands and stuff, I hear that fantastic Hanna-Barbera laser beam sound effect and everything. And again, that's these cartoons were rich, and again, it really provides you and Jonathan for a great jumping on point in terms of how to expand the mythos. And I think you're doing a hell of a job, David. Honestly, absolutely.
I really appreciate that. It's I feel like this book, I can tell you, I did not expect this book to take off the way that it did. And that maybe my best books that seems to have happened. I think I vastly underestimated like the number of people who are both, there's nostalgia for Space Ghost, but I think there's also people who they're just like, oh, that's interesting. Like this character design is really cool. Michael Cho's covers in particular, I think really drew in a lot of people. And he did our first 5 issues. He did an amazing job with his variant covers.
I don't know who painted this, for example, but this
Barron.
really. Oh, there you go. And it's, my God, it reminds me of that fantastic oil painting of Superman that used to hang in DC's offices in New York. And I know they moved it to Burbank as well. But that's the thing, man. I mean, that design is just so perfect. And it lends itself to this kind of classical interpretation of painting, as well as just a good, clean Toth knockoff. Doc Shaner during Future Quest and everything gave us a real classic Toth design, the way he drew that series and everything. So yeah, I get it.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have told me that they were kind of surprised that they feel like Space Ghost came out of nowhere. But my opinion is Space Ghost never went anywhere. I feel like if anything, he just kind of evolves with the times. And I've been really fortunate to get to know Andy Merrill a little bit from he was one of the creators of Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
Oh.
And a really lovely guy who I think people are finally starting to kind of give him his due online. And he's been so supportive of the book. And the thing that I really appreciate is not only was Coast to Coast my introduction to the character before I learned who Alex Toth was and before I read the Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti run.
Sure.
But I feel like Coast to Coast really, this book would not exist if Space Ghost Coast to Coast hadn't happened. And I think Coast to Coast, in a lot of ways, it really preserved the bones of Space Ghost in Amber. It kept his name alive, but that I think really opened up some interesting opportunities for creators like me, where for years, Space Ghost, he had a decade-long run as the talk show host.
That's right.
But because they kept his name alive, we were then able to kind of go back to those roots to excavate those bones and show everybody that those bones are still as strong as they were in the 60s.
Yep.
And I think that it's been just as much archaeology as it has been a creative exercise. And I think there's just a timeless quality to Space Ghost. And I just feel very lucky to be along for the ride for this.
Has it made you look at other Toth designs, and not just the Hanna-Barbera stuff? But it's funny, the other day, and unrelated to us talking, I stumbled on YouTube a bunch of Space Angel cartoons. And I don't know if you know Space Angel, but are you aware of Clutch Cargo and how they would draw animation, but the mouth was live action and stuff? It was the same principle, but a sci-fi series of the early '60s that Toth designed for the same animation company as Clutch Cargo.
Oh, that's cool.
But it's kind of an evolution. And yeah, man, no, the spaceship designs and and his astronaut suit, he had it's funny, it's pre Star Trek, but he had a Scottish man, he had a 2-man crew. I should say man and
Oh, no
woman.
way.
And yeah, Taurus was this guy who clearly had a Scottish accent. And I mean, I saw it after watching Star Trek when I was a little kid. So it's like, oh yeah, of course, there's a Scottish guy
Yeah.
on the
Oh, that's funny.
It's great. It's a great series, and really, everybody, you should check it out just for the designs, because it is in a painterly style that is less Hanna-Barbera and really kind of relying on the actual whatever the original art was, kind of in the same way that a lot of the Marvel superhero cartoons of the '60s, really were lifted from the comics and had a more painterly style, despite their limited animation. It's the same thing in Space Angel.
Yeah, the thing that really struck me, I saw somebody refer to Alex Toth as the Jack Kirby of animation. And while I think in certain ways that's reductive because he did have a career outside of animation, but I do think in that particular context, it's dead on. I think he was able to say so much through design. Because a lot of these shows, they didn't have a lot of runway to develop characters.
No.
They had just enough time to kind of introduce, here's the threat, and the heroes are sort of in dire straits, and here's how they get out of it, and maybe they end it with like a little half life lesson or a little cheesy joke. And the fact that these characters really possessed a life of their own because of Toth's designs. You see with somebody like Zorak, you see like, oh, that's a praying mantis, like a life-sized, human-sized praying mantis. Like, look at his creepy little eyes.
Oh yeah,
the world is different. You see Brack in that face mask, and you're just like, who comes up with this? In the best possible way. And I think just the sheer, not just imagination that he brought, but just even from almost like a geometric standpoint, the way that he shapes his designs, it's really, it's both retro and futuristic. It's just being able to kind of play in that legacy, knowing that I'm never going to approach that legacy, but doing what I can to like honor it as best I can. That's been, sometimes daunting, but often exhilarating. It's just trying to sort of pay homage to a character and often a creator who were not given as much spotlight as they deserve. And so, yeah, it's just been, this is a book that in a lot of ways, the directives have changed for me since I took it over. And it's not from Dynamite. It's not from our licensor. There are people at Warner Brothers who've been amazing to work with. I think it's just, as I've gotten further into this, I've realized like, the stakes feel high because of the legacy that we're playing in. And so to have, to be able to play a small part in that is, it's a real career highlight and a true honor.
Are there vetting rules from Hanna-Barbera or Warner Brothers regarding what you can and can't do with Space Ghost?
Honestly, Warner Brothers has been such an incredible licensing partner. I've worked with plenty of licensors over my career.
Sure.
And I will say, hands down, my experience on Space Ghost has been the best license project I've ever worked on. They have given us a ton of latitude. They've given us a lot of room to be able to explore these characters in the way that we think is the most exciting and dynamic. It helps that when I came up with Space Ghost, this run, when I was developing it, I wrote a 35-page outline, and I went real in depth. I actually had in the comments, I had a page-to-page breakdown of every single issue for the first 13 issues. And on top of that, I added in character bios of like, here's what I think is Space Ghost deal, J&J Splip. Here's the various villains. For example, Zorak, I said, I don't want him to be Space Ghost Joker. That feels like a little reductive. I want to make him the Charles Manson of space.
Hilarious. Yeah.
He's got his followers, and then, by virtue of that, like, oh, if he's running a cult, what do they worship? Oh, they worship Lokar. And so I really laid out what the plan was. And on top of that, I even, I said, if we get past this 13 issues, here are more villains that we can use, and here's ways we can do that. And so I think Warner Brothers, hopefully not speaking out of turn, I think because we gave them so much material to look at, I think that gave them some confidence to say, okay, that sounds really great. I can count on one hand the number of notes I've gotten from Warner Brothers, and they've all been cosmetic. I think the biggest note I ever got from them was while we were developing it. I had asked if we wanted to give Jan and Jace code names, and they were like, that might be like an extra wrinkle that complicates it that we don't need. I think beyond that, in issue 1, they asked me if I could change like one character's line to sound a little more spacey. It was like, he's like, holy Clark. I think in our Zorak 2-parter, when Zorak appears, we have like a splash of blood on the page, and the licensor, when they saw that in the script, they're like, could we make that a silhouette of a splash of blood? I'm like, yeah, these are I call them 10-second notes. It's very easy to make that fix. And so Warner Brothers has been excellent to work with in that regard. And I think they've really just kind of, it would be so easy for them to be tight-fingered over these properties. And I think by virtue of, the last time that there was like an in-depth Space Ghost-centric storyline was almost 20 years ago. Even Future Quest, he kind of bookends that book. And
yes.
Future Quest Presents, is probably like the last standalone Space Ghost story, before us, and that was only one arc with Metalis. So I think they've been very supportive of how far we want to run with this. It has felt like the sky's the limit with Warner Brothers, and I cannot be more grateful to them. Can't be more grateful to everyone at Dynamite, Nick Barucci and Joe Rybant, our editor on the book. They have really given us the freedom to take the ball and run with it and really explore Space Ghost and his supporting cast and his universe in the ways that we think are the biggest swings and the most exciting and dynamic paths. And you can't always say that with every license, and that is why licensors exist. It is, they need to be out there watching out for their properties and their intellectual properties, and making sure that you're not going so far afield that either it makes the IP look bad or it runs counter to any plans they have. So I totally understand it, but it is a breath of fresh air and wildly refreshing to work with a licensor like Warner Brothers, who says, you've got the raw materials, do what you can to make it good.
First of all, I want to point out obviously a comment from Patrick Sargent, and I agree with this. Space Ghost makes comics fun.
Thank you.
But I also want to expand on the variant covers beyond the covers themselves, and I know those are collectible. Does Dynamite then have the license to make prints? Because you guys have gotten so many great people doing these alternate takes of the classic design.
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that question, but I would say anytime that I don't know the answer to the question, I always say, write your congressman. Tell Dynamite if you want prints. For example, Michael Cho's covers were very, very popular, particularly his covers for issue 3 and issue 5. Issue 3 is just is one of my favorite covers I've ever been lucky enough to be a part of, and the way that he left us with issue 5 with this just beautiful kind of like vintage serial cover with me and Jonathan's names on it. It meant so much to me. So I would say tweet Dynamite. Hit him up on social media. Say, we would love prints of whatever cover strikes your fancy. The worst they can say is they can't, based on whatever agreement they have with Warner Brothers. But I think it would be super neat. I would love to have one of those covers on my wall.
Yeah.
Write your congressman. I would love to see that happen.
Well, following you as I do on social media, I've seen you put those covers up and everything promoting the series. And they're great. They really are great. And again, I have the example of, I think that's issue 2, the painted one that I've got there. And of course, again, just out. Is it out this Wednesday?
Yes, issue 6 comes out in 2 days' time.
Fantastic.
We're very excited for that one. And yeah, that kind of wraps up what we, I guess, consider the first arc, at least as far as the trade paperbacks are concerned. So yeah, definitely, it's never too late to check in on Space Ghost. We've got some fun stuff brewing, and I can't wait for you all to read it.
Excellent. Now let's talk Cable. And again, I'm sorry I don't have an image for everybody.
No.
Maybe we'll make a video short of it, and I'll throw up a couple images there.
You can see I'm representing my Xavier Institute shirt.
Excuse me, buddy. Here, I'll zoom in. Hang on.
Yeah, here you go.
There it is. Nice. Nice.
I've had this shirt for many years. I'm very excited to finally be able to wear that in the context of work. I am writing a miniseries called Cable, Love, and Chrome with artist Mike Henderson. It's coming out starting in January. We just announced it only a couple weeks ago. I'm super excited to be working on this. Tom Brevoort reached out to me. It was just around when we announced Space Ghost. I've worked with Tom since my first days at Marvel. He's the best editor I've ever worked with by a country mile. So I was so honored that he would ask me to be involved in any way in his big, sweeping, ambitious X-Men relaunch.
Sure.
And him knowing that I grew up as 90s trash, it is perhaps not surprising that he said, Cable, we want to do a miniseries with Cable. And so as we talked about, some possible story angles, the thing that Tom was really interested in was like, how do we take Cable, who's this kind of big, larger than life, bombastic action character, and how do we give him a story that still feels personal and human? And the idea of a love story in the context of a big, bombastic, action-packed Cable story was something that was presented to me. And so as we talked about it, I kind of went back to my roots where I thought about, I grew up in the 90s, Fatal Attractions, Age of Apocalypse, X-Men 90s show. That was my era. And I remember my introduction to Cable. It was during Fatal Attractions. He goes foolishly head to head against Magneto, who rips him a new one, and he winds up going back to John Proudstar's reservation, and they heal him up based on his techno-organic virus. Also, the adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix, which kind of delves into Cable's origin stories as a child dealing with the techno-organic virus. And as I talked with my wife about Cable, she asked me, and she's smart, I married up. She said, what is it about Cable that's like different from anybody else? And so I thought a lot about it. The X-Men, they have other time travelers. They have Bishop, they have Rachel Summers.
Yep.
Just to name a few off the top of my head.
Sure.
They have other telepaths. Jean Grey, Psylocke, Emma Frost, just to name a few. The thing that makes Cable unique and interesting and complicated and complex, in my eyes, is that he is the character who's been grappling with the techno-organic virus. And for me, I see that as a metaphor for people who deal with these chronic, lifelong, sometimes terminal conditions. It is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for cancer or ALS or before the legacy virus, HIV. That there are people living with these conditions all the time where,
sure,
they every day is kind of a struggle. And the idea of this time traveler who lives on borrowed time was so interesting to me, that every day he has to use his considerable telekinetic energy to keep this virus at bay, knowing that one day, like, even those gifts are going to fail. And I think that speaks to so much about Cable as a character and his posture. The sort of over the top 90s big guns, big action, big attitude makes a lot of sense when you're a guy who's trying to kind of hide the fact that, like, you're dying and that one day you are going to die and that you don't want to be a burden to those who love you. You don't want people to see you in that way, in that vulnerable position. So you are going to be as big and brash and bombastic as you can be while you're still on your own 2 feet. And so Cable, Love, and Chrome is an interesting story in that Mike Henderson and I, we are stranding Cable during a mission through time, and he winds up in a timeline where the techno-organic virus has become a larger concern. And so what happens to this character who's had this burden that he's dealt with largely by himself, And not to say that he hasn't had support from people like Domino or Cape or Cyclops and Phoenix or Hope Summers, but there's a difference between people who support you and someone who knows this journey intimately because they've lived it. And so this is the story of what happens to Cable when he meets someone with the same condition as him. And so it is a story about kind of love and loss and confronting one's own mortality, but also a story that has all the action and attitude and big guns that you'd expect from a Cable story. I had pitched this book as Edge of Tomorrow and Mad Max Fury Road meets Fault in Our Stars with the techno-organic virus. And
very interesting.
So being able to kind of explore that unique element of Cable, I think that kind of plays into his central metaphor as a character, while still being able to have our cake and eat it too, with just kind of all that larger than life action that has been Cable's staple since his introduction.
Is the love interest a new character?
She is, yes, Commander Avery Ryder. She is a commander at the Resistance Army in Salvation Bay, which is kind of this dystopian city where the techno-organic virus has become a bigger concern. There's sort of the haves and the have-nots. There's the government of the Prime Conclave, who they are sort of they consider themselves the purebloods, the ones who aren't infected, and they have developed not a cure for the techno-organic virus, but sort of a stopgap measure that can hold the symptoms at bay, at least for a certain period of time. And they've used this medicine to kind of enslave the techno-organic underclass and sort of put them in this kind of ghetto undercity of Salvation Bay. And so people like Avery are leading this resistance to sort of free themselves from the Conclave's yoke and to be able to kind of access this medicine for a greater population. It does sound a little familiar to real life in that way.
Sure.
Kind of the dystopian hoops that we have to jump through in the American healthcare system. But yeah, I think the idea of building a character like Avery has been really cool and really interesting. And Mike Henderson has done such an amazing job in bringing her to life. That was a big challenge for me, was as we were kind of coming up with this character. I know full well that Cable has had other love interests in his life. You know, he's had Domino, he's had Esme Cuckoo, you know, he's had flirtations with Storm. You know, he had Hope Summers' mother, or stepmother, I should say, like in the far future, Jen Scott, you know, from his original miniseries. And so for me, I wanted to figure out, okay, what about this character feels unique? How do we kind of have her occupy a different sort of niche? And that's been something that's been really cool and fun and interesting, is how do you have a character that can keep up with a character that's as high octane as Cable? And so I'm very excited for readers to get to see what that is like. I'm also really excited that we're introducing a brand new villain to the Cable mythos. You know, sort of a mysterious figure that I don't want to go too deep into it, other than I will say their name is Cicada. And Cicada is sort of a character that I love the idea of Cable being a living weapon. You know, the fact that he's got the big guns, big pouches, big ammo, and pitting him against a character who can literally sort of shape shift their body and their bones and every bit of themselves to turn themselves into a living weapon that it can go toe to toe with Cable, that can really, like, that goes for the jugular, that really just has a deep seated mad on for Cable. And so seeing Cable kind of have to navigate this villain, you know, it speaks to, I think, a different angle on the character. It's been really fun to kind of get to explore Cable and his voice and his characterization. If you've never read a Cable comic, he's got a lot going on. You know, he was born to the Cyclops, sort of this legendary mutant general, infected with the techno-organic virus by Apocalypse, a huge mutant figure, shunted to the far future in hopes of stabilizing his condition. Then the spirits of his parents from our time get shunted to the far future in clone bodies and then raise him as a teenager. And then Cable winds up fighting as a resistance against Apocalypse kills Apocalypse, continues the resistance, winds up having a time machine going back in time. He's also a telepath, a telekinetic. He's got the techno-organic virus. He's got an AI helper named Bell. He's also got the ability to teleport via body slide technology and time jump via time slide technology. He's got a lot going on. And so it's been really interesting to figure out a way to, how do you distill that, but still speak to all these various facets of the character. And the thing that really stood out to me for him in terms of his voice, I was watching something with Scott Glenn, and that voice like clicked for me. And I was like, oh, it's sort of, it's this sort of hard-edged, but like a little exhausted, a little sick of all this. It's sort of like if Bruce Willis and Sam Elliott had a baby.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, when I was talking with Tom Brevoort about my take on Cable, I said, he's like if Mad Max and John McClane had a baby and that baby had a time machine. Just kind of going for these big, larger than life action sequences, but still being able to tell a story that is personal and does have emotion to it and really winds up, without spoiling too much, interrogates Cable's entire mission. That's a really interesting and fun and unique opportunity. And so I'm really excited for fans to get to check out Cable, Love, and Chrome. And you can pre-order issue 1 now through your local comic shop. We've got some amazing covers. I believe Ian Churchill is going to be doing covers for all 5 issues. And Ian, being a legendary Cable artist, the fact that he was doing covers, I remember Ian drawing Heroes Reborn back when I was a kid, and his take on Iron Man, I used to draw it over and over and over again. So having Ian doing the covers on one of my books is like just a full circle moment for me. He's doing incredible work. I got to see the line art for issue 2, Cable and Avery together, and it's a really cool looking cover. And yeah, if anybody's interested in sort of teeing up, kind of what we're doing in Love and Chrome, we will have some teases as to what we're doing over in Steve Fox's upcoming Time Slide one shot. So be sure to pre-order that as well if you're a completist.
Again, without spoiling, will we see other characters from the X-Men world, an alternate version of them in this future timeline that Cable finds himself in?
Yeah, we will see. There will be some references to that. In particular, something that I think was that we. I'm trying to decide how much I want to spoil here.
Sure.
There's a certain X-Men character that we last saw during the Krakoan Age, who I feel like there was a little bit of a thread left for us, and so there's going to be something that there will be a few things that we address, but also this story is very self-contained by virtue of it happening in a different timeline. It's going to be it is going to be fairly far removed from whatever's going on in Gail Simone's book and Jed McKay's book. This is very much a standalone Cable adventure, but one that we get to, I think, play around with the mechanics of time travel in a way that I don't think a Cable book has done before. It's sort of it's almost like a Rick and Morty kind of thing, an angle to that, in that, like, just how does this work? And what is changing time? How does that impact things? A little bit of timey-wimey stuff going on in the book, on top of kind of this sort of fun revolutionary action and this sort of brewing dynamic with Cable and Avery. So, long story short, you don't have to be reading anything else to get the book. This is very much kind of its own standalone, self-contained storyline. But one that, I think if you're a fan of Cable and are interested in seeing him kind of have this struggle against himself and the struggle with his own mission and this struggle with this core part of who he is and something that he's grappled with for so much time, this is definitely a story you're not going to want to miss.
Very cool, man. No, that's great. And I just talked to Declan Shalvey the other day about his Mystique
Yeah.
miniseries that's going on. And yeah, that's good, man. Well, I'm kind of saving really sitting down with that Hickman run,
Yeah.
even though it's been years now. But I know the stars will align. John and I have had trouble connecting the last couple of years, but we
Oh,
will. And
so
when I went, again, thanks Marvel Unlimited, because it will allow me to go back and read that stuff. But yeah, man, no, this is good. And it's funny. I'm not a big X-Men fan for the big picture, but I've always appreciated characters like Bishop and like Cable that
yeah.
come along and really are so distinct from the other mutants and everything. And yeah, so this is a good opportunity to tell an interesting story and really get inside Cable's head, maybe in a way that we haven't seen before.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Like, it's he's such an interesting character, and I feel like it's very interesting bouncing between him and Space Ghost. Space Ghost in a lot of ways feels like I'm playing classical music, and diving into the X-Men and sort of their long jagged continuity. It feels like playing jazz.
Funny.
And Cable, to me, he's so interesting because first and foremost, he's this product of sort of this wild, unbridled Rob Liefeld imagination. Like he's
Yep.
the focused totality of like Rob's designs and his sensibilities as a storyteller, and really riding that wave of his growing popularity when Cable was introduced. And also he's one of those characters that before Cable, like Wolverine was really the only standalone X-Man, and Cable winds up kicking the door down and being sort of the second X-Men character to be able to hold their own, and has done so many times. And so and even just knowing now that like Cable has sort of breached the pop culture, the popular consciousness,
Sure.
having that two-hander role in Deadpool 2.
Yep.
That's a cool character to get to play around with, and being able to do so during this particular time where everything's sort of this kind of brand new era of X-Men storytelling, that we've had this amazing run of Krakoa, and now we're sort of ushering in something new and wild and unpredictable. And I mean, I can tell you as a creator and a fan, I love this because every comic, somebody's going to read that comic and be like, I'm a lifer. I grew up in the 90s and I'm a lifer, like, so I feel like that's this is an interesting time in comics. It's an interesting time in
I agree.
It's an interesting time in to be writing in the X-Men office. I wouldn't change any of it. It's just change. It's the one constant that we have in this business.
Sure.
And yeah, so getting to be even a small part of it with Cable, Love and Chrome, it's been a real treat and a real honor. And yeah, I'm very excited to see what readers think about this book. I can tell you, Mike Henderson is drawing just incredible work. As soon as Tom told me he was on the book, I was so excited. I had just been reading his work on The Forged over at Image, and I thought, this is a guy who can draw robots and tech and like cool stuff like that. So so he's been doing some really cool stuff, and I can't wait for y'all to see it.
That's great, man. No, that's great. And really, you've gotten great opportunities at Marvel, and I'm glad they've paid off. I forget who I was reading recently. It might have been Deck and that Mystique book, but I know that your Punisher showed up recently in something else.
Yes, he was in Erica Schultz's Daredevil Woman Without Fear miniseries, which I believe should be hitting its fourth and final issue soon.
Yes.
And that was so cool having Joe be a part of that. It was one of those things when I was contracted to come up with Joe's origin arc. It was really interesting to like, the only way that these legacy characters ever have any legs is if other creators take them on. And so,
absolutely.
So it was really cool to see Erica take on Joe and do cool things with him. And yeah, I hope Marvel does some cool stuff with him down the line. that's the cool thing about coming up with a legacy character like that, is that they exist and they're always going to be part of the tapestry, and there's always room for creators down the line to kind of cherry pick that, in the same way that, you know, Danny Ketch took the torch from Johnny Blaze, and the way that Robbie Reyes took the torch from Danny Ketch.
Eric Masterson with Thunderstrike, and how
Yeah.
important Thunderstrike was during
Don't
his
even
time.
don't even get me started. I love Eric Masterson. What I wouldn't do to write anything Thunderstrike related.
I'm surprised, David, that he hasn't come back. I was cherry picking some highlights of my one talk with Ron Friends, and
Yeah.
we really got into Eric and Thunderstrike.
That's the 90s trash in me that I'm like,
Sure.
I love Thunderstrike. I would love to doing anything with Thunderstrike. You know, I keep knocking on people's doors asking if they ever want anything with Forceworks to hit your boy up.
Sure.
But yeah,
Nice.
I mean, those are all super fun characters. Yeah, I mean, you know, the 90s, like they're like I'm part of that generation that grew up with that, and so being able to revisit all that, it's nice. It's a nice moment.
Well, they really tried to do a lot of different things in the 90s, and the various shifts really made for interesting comics. That, again, I mean, I just had Glenn Greenberg on, and you know, he was an editor during that rise and fall of the 90s, and you know, it was great hearing his stories, and he occasionally wrote as well. But yeah, you know, guys like DeFalco and Howard Mackey and some of those guys that were from that period. It is interesting, and I have to confess, I stayed away. I as much as it excited you, it kind of turned. No, and again, hey man, everyone, when they enter comics, that first decade is precious to them, and that's how the 70s were for me. Being older than you, and being older than a lot of the readers now, and there's a lot of crap that I will defend and stand on that hill and go, no. Let me tell you why that crappy stuff from the 70s was still good and meant a lot to me and stuff. So no, I respect that. And it's fun. Again, thank God for Marvel Unlimited, because I am able to go back and read this stuff. And it's some of it I can't, I still can't take. And so, I was trying to get into Nomad, because I really appreciate the idea of a Bucky, and what happens when a Bucky is allowed to go extreme the way that he did. And I'm blanking now on what Bucky's or Nomad's Jack. I forget his last name.
Jack Monroe.
Jack Monroe, of course, Jack Monroe. Yeah, so I'm like, all right, I remember when he was first introduced. What did they do with him? And they, again, it's that Liefeld inspired kind of art of the 90s and stuff, at least the ones I've read.
And that's why I feel like a character like Joe Garrison kind of like fits in that paradigm. You never know sort of what the plans are for characters, and you never know when they're going to appear next. And but being able to kind of add in a brick to that mythology, to be able to add in a new Punisher that stands in that pantheon with Frank Castle and Rachel Cole Alvis and Outlaw and Jake Gallows, the Punisher 2099. It's cool to be able to add to the House of Ideas.
I bet
in a small way. And so, I always tell anybody that if you like Joe Garrison, tell Marvel, tell them you want to see more Joe. I wish I knew sort of what the plans were. I don't. I feel like sort of any kind of future casting that we might have had changed because, of course, my editor on Punisher wound up taking over the X-Men office. And so I think any sort of vague plans that we had, I'm sure have changed since then. But I know that Punisher, the editorial group, they're great editors. Punisher as a concept, as a book, they're in excellent hands. And I'm excited to see what they've got coming next.
Have you, and I don't know if your capacity at Marvel means you can't work at DC right now. Have you pitched? Are you trying to, do you have DC ideas should the opportunity come?
Sure. I got my start in the industry as a DC intern. I would love to do stuff over there. I feel like it would be like a real full circle moment, a real moment of coming home. I don't have any plans at DC at the moment, but, I'm certainly open to it. There are all sorts of characters that I think are really cool. Shazam has sort of been on my bucket list for a long time. The Flash is another wonderful character. Superman, of course, I feel a lot of kinship with. I grew up in the Midwest. I used to be a journalist. The Suicide Squad. I would love to do something with the Suicide Squad because I love writing villains and I love team books, and so that sort of feels like a win-win. But the cool thing about DC is they have such a range of characters that of course you've got your A-listers that are like leading the Justice League, but then you've got you've got Dr. Fate, you've got Etrigan, you've got the Metal Men. Chris Cantwell is doing phenomenal work with Plastic Man, of all characters. That Plastic Man No More book is sensational.
I agree.
And so I love that about DC, and I feel like that's something that just on the outside, I feel like that's something that James Gunn's really embracing on the movie side of things, where who would have thought that Peacemaker not only would be like a core part of like a super cool movie, something that like really made me remember why I love the Suicide Squad, but also like headlining his own TV show, and also an incredible comic miniseries by Kyle Starks. Like,
Yes.
it's I love that about DC, is that it sort of the A-listers and the Z-listers get to kind of like coexist in the same place.
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, for me, I feel like there's no such thing as a bad character.
Right.
I think it's just finding the right angle and sometimes finding the right creative team and somebody with the right voice for the character. But I feel like any character, and this has always been something that's happened to me a lot of Marvel, is my wife will ask me, "Oh, is there a character that you think you'd like choke on wildly?" At least in my first 2 years there, every time that I would tell her, "Oh, I don't think I have anything for like Fantastic Four," like 2 weeks later, I'm like, "Oh, somebody says you want to do two issues on Fantastic Four?" I'm like, "I guess I better come up with an idea." I'm like, Hulk. Oh, I don't know what I would do. And then Will Moss emails and says, "Hey, we're doing a Hulk annual." Yes, and that is
Moon Knight. You did a great job on your Moon Knight miniseries.
Thank you. It was the Calvin and Hobbes strip where they say, how do you get creativity to turn on? And they're like, sheer unbridled panic. And that's very much my creative process is, of course, I have pitches for a lot of characters in my back pocket, and I will often knock on people's doors being like, hey, got any room for War Machine or something? But I feel like the way that my career has tended to work is often by accident. Usually it's somebody hitting me up about a character that I have never thought anything about, never thought that I would be the guy writing anything. And, you get thrown in the deep end of the pool and you just got to swim. That's a really fun, sometimes stressful, but often entertaining way of living your life in your career. But I wouldn't trade it for anything.
I know Wade challenges himself and sometimes we'll have a cliffhanger and when he's writing it being like, I don't know.
I've heard that. That's crazy.
Yeah. He's discussed it with me.
I say that as somebody who has been a tremendous fan of Mark Waid's. Kingdom Come was kind of like my intro to him. You guys all know my vintage at this point. But when I heard that story that he's like, oh yeah, sometimes I just write like cliffhangers and I don't know how I'm going to get my way out of it. That's crazy to me. I tend to write for the ending, for either if it's the cliffhanger,
go backwards,
and the handful of times that I have had to like rework my ending, and then I'm like, oh, I just reworked my ending from the outline. Now I got to like take the next issue completely apart to like make this work. It's challenging to say the least. So yeah, the fact that Mark's like, oh yeah, I just, whatever, I do that. I'm like, this is why he's Mark Waid. That he's been in this business for so long.
Absolutely.
That is a gift and a talent. And boy, one day I hope to be like that. I tend to outline everything within an inch of its life because it makes the scripting a lot more fun and a lot less stressful. But Mark, that is a real talent to be able to do that. And I will envy him forever for it.
We're only a week or so away from New York Comic Con. Are you going?
I will be there. So yeah, come find me. I'll be tabling at the Comic Sketch Art Cluster. I believe I will also be doing a horror signing at Mad Cave Studios, I believe on Thursday. So let's see if I have it in my calendar. I do not, because I am not organized. But yes, find me. I believe it's on Thursday, possibly Friday. I'll be signing The Devil That Wears My Face, which the trade paperback for that came out recently. I thought
Wonderful.
Alex Cormack did such an amazing job on that book. It's
Oh, yeah.
Face Off meets The Exorcist, if you haven't read it. But yeah, come find me. I'll be signing as much as of what I've got of everything. So yeah, don't miss out.
Are there new announcements for you coming, perhaps in New York, or if not, soon after?
Terrificon, Connecticut's biggest Comic Con, is back at the Mohegan Sun.
Sorry, everybody. Fat
No.
fingers. Keep going.
No, I am in the process, the early stages of a couple new series that hopefully, barring approval, we'll be able to talk about around when Cable comes out. I did just sign a new creator-owned book that will be coming out around this time next year. So you'll be hearing more about that in 2025.
Okay.
Yeah, but right now, Cable and Space Ghost are sort of my big swings for the moment. But yes, count on. I'm working on two really fun projects for 2025. So as soon as those get approved, it's going to be quite a busy year for my household.
Sounds good, man. Well, we all know, again, right now the focus, as you said, is Space Ghost issue 6 coming out this Wednesday. Fantastic. And jump on, everybody, especially on that Moltar story. It's fantastic. And then the trade to follow. And Cable coming in January. That'll be terrific as well. And there are articles beyond our conversation to kind of get some more detail about it. But yeah, David, you're killing it. And next weekend you'll be at not this coming weekend, but the following weekend you'll be at New York Comic Con.
Yes, come find me.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for having me, John. It's always a pleasure to catch up, and I really appreciate you having me on the show. And for everyone listening, thank you so much for taking the time. It's having a career like mine. It always can be very topsy turvy, but having readers and listeners like yourselves in my corner, that's what it gets me up out of bed every day. Pre-ordering books is always so helpful. It keeps my puppy Ruby fed and kibble. So if you call your local comic shop, have them pre-order Space Ghost, add it to your pull list, have them pre-order Cable, Love and Chrome, coming out in January. It's a 5-issue mini, so I promise we won't be overstaying our welcome. It really helps us out a lot. And yeah, if you're going to be at New York Comic Con, please come stop by. Please bring your books. I'd be happy to sign them. And I'd also be happy to give you the soft sell on some of my other books that you may not have read yet.
What's your wife's name?
Claire.
Has Claire embraced the comic culture? Was she a reader before you guys hooked up? And what are her observations of your career? And
Claire is the perfect comic book spouse. She is not a diehard comics fan. She probably didn't know too much about the comics industry before she and I met. But she has been my North Star. I would not have a creative career if I had never met her. It was our 5th date when I told her I had an idea for an animated screenplay, and she was so excited by it that I realized I had to finish. And that kind of transitioned into writing teleplays, just to kind of learn how to write, and then eventually writing my first comic, Spencer and Locke.
Spencer and Locke, fantastic. Absolutely.
Claire reads all of my scripts. I make sure she's a voracious reader, and I always send her my work to make sure. I, of course, love writing for diehard comic fans, but I do want to make sure that ordinary civilians can understand what I'm trying to write. And so she is just so wonderful. She really makes sure that I focus on like the human core, emotional core of these stories, because that's ultimately why we're reading. Is, of course, it's the love of the spectacle and the action. But if we don't care about these characters, if there's nothing that we can relate to, it's all just kind of empty fireworks. It doesn't mean anything. And so, having Claire in my corner it's been my secret weapon as a creator. And I wouldn't have a career without her. So, and if you want to learn more about our dynamic, you can pick up Fantastic Four 47 and 48, my two-parter. That story was all about her. So,
oh, nice.
Definitely read it on Marvel Unlimited or check out
I will.
Judgment Day Companion.
That sounds great, man. Very cool. Very cool. Everybody, thanks for watching. If you missed it earlier today, I had a great conversation with Ram V. We talked about previewed his New God series coming up for DC in December, and we kind of looked at Batman Nocturne and Detective Comics, a fantastic story that he just wrapped up, and a few other things. Tomorrow on Word Balloon, Shannon Wheeler is back on Word Balloon. Too Much Coffee Man. I've always been a fan of his, and he's got a Kickstarter campaign that I'm happy to help promote. And then on Wednesday, Chris Ryle is going to join me talking about his representation of the Origins of Marvel Comics Stan Lee trade that came out in the 70s. I remember it well. 50 years ago, I was a little pipsqueak, really, 9 years old, and it was the best Christmas I had at that point when my parents got me Origins and Son of Origins and the Batman and Superman from the 30s to 70s books. So they knew their kid, and they knew what I wanted to read, and it really was that wonderful time when there aren't that many trades and collections of comics. So it was really cool to see it presented that way. I know that there's a book right now that a guy wrote that kind of shits on Stan Lee and his neglect of his collaborators and stuff. We'll get into it with Chris. I'm reading that as well as reading Chris's representation and the new articles and essays that he has. The aforementioned Tom Brevoort part of the mix for people that have contributed to the new edition of Origins of Marvel Comics. So that's pretty much Word Balloon Live this week, and happy to have David on to help start things off this week as well. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Until next time, everybody stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.